If the buyers don't do it, then who does pay the buyer's real estate agent when they purchase a home? Because somebody's going to have to do it, they're going to want to be paid. We'll get to that right away, but I do want to point out that some of this may be changing very soon, and I'll get into that more towards the end of the video, so make sure you stick around. Currently, and since the concept of a buyer's agent or an agent representing the best interests of the buyer during a real estate transaction even came into existence in 1993, just over 30 years ago, it has been the seller of the home. So how this happens is when the seller is ready to list their home for sale, they meet with their realtor and put together the whole plan for marketing and selling the property, discuss and negotiate the commission that will be paid to the listing agent. Then the listing agent splits that commission with the agent representing the buyers for the home. Many, many years ago, before we did have buyer's agents, listing agents would charge their fee typically between 5 and 6% and keep the whole thing. This all came about out of necessity. Back then, although it is very complicated now, it was even harder and more complicated because they didn't have the online resources that we do today. There was a lot of legwork involved in showing and selling a home. So what started happening around the 1980s was that real estate agents would show a home for the listing agent to buyers that they found that were interested in the property, and then bring that buyer to the listing agent in order to facilitate a deal. And the listing agents were very happy to have the help of the selling agents or cooperating agents, they were called both, and they would pay them half of their commission for finding a buyer for their home. So at the time, many home buyers thought that these agents taking them to properties were looking out for their best interests, were representing them. The cooperating agents, selling agents, were not. They didn't owe them any fiduciary duties, they had not signed any agreements, and they weren't representing their best interests. They were just trying to find a home to help sell to them. But the home buyers really didn't have any of their own representation. In fact, these cooperating brokers and agents owed their fiduciary duties to the seller of the home, even though they may never have met them. Fast forward to the early 90s, after many years of protests from buyers demanding access and a better way to have support and representation through the process, the courts did get involved, clarified what the real estate agents had already been doing on their own, and made way for real estate agents to represent home buyers, look out for their best interests, negotiate on their behalf, and finally, the real estate market was much more fair and just for home buyers as well. Now, in the DC area, all 3 states, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, we have really great buyers representation agreements which go through all of the responsibilities of both the home buyer and the buyer's agent. And there is a paragraph about commission. This paragraph does put it onto the home buyer's plate and basically always has to be clarified. The way that I typically do that is by making a note at the bottom in the additional information section saying the seller has made an offer to pay the commission listed in Section 8B in Virginia, Section 6B in DC and parts of Maryland on the buyer's behalf, and it is listed in the MLS, which has always been the case. They do vary somewhat, but they do average 2.5% to 3%. In fact, here in the DC area, and based on my experience, I'd say that I pretty much only see between 2.5% to 3%. A couple of times I saw 2.25, and one time I saw 1%, but my clients didn't actually want to see it, which is great because then we didn't have to deal with that. And it was about a 2-hour drive from here. But basically, the buyer's agency agreement is worded so that you can understand what duties the realtor will provide to you, and you can understand how to make sure that everything goes smoothly as well. There's information there for the buyer to understand not to reach out to other real estate agents during the process or for sale by owner properties on their own, which will ensure that your buyer's agent can do the work and collect the commission that's owed to them from the seller. The only times that the buyer would end up on the hook paying the commission for their own agent would be something fairly extreme, like they ended up working with another agent, so they made a contract with agent 1, saw and closed a property with agent 2 without canceling the first buyer's agency agreement with agent number 1. It is typically very easy to get out of these buyer agency agreements. They're really just there so that everybody understands their responsibilities, what's owed to them, and what they should do to maintain the agency agreement. And from a realtor's perspective, they are doing a ton of work on the front end before before any contract is signed, sometimes before the home buyer is even pre-approved. So they just want, on a piece of paper that this home buyer will use them in their next real estate transaction. I know I just feel better when I have that on a piece of paper, which, by the way, these contracts are typically very easy to get out of. Very rare when there's any sort of termination fee or any sort of deposit, unless there's a whole lot of work for a particular type of mission that the real estate agent is working on for the home buyer. It's usually really easy to get out of them with a few days notice. If you're very unhappy with the work that the agent's been providing you and you don't want to continue, whether you think that they cannot close on a property, can't find you the right thing, can't negotiate the right contract, something's not working, just get out of the contract the right way so that you won't be on the hook for that agent's commission. I've never seen this happen, but I'm sure it does. People maybe forget that their agreement hasn't expired, that type of thing too. I've never personally had this happen to me, so I can say that's probably pretty rare. You just have to be clear and give the notice that's required in the buyer agency agreement. The other situation where the buyer may end up paying the buyer agent's commission is something like a for sale by owner. Even with a for sale by owner, typically what I have found is if I reach out to the seller and I say, I have clients that would really love to see your home. How do you feel about paying my fee on behalf of my buyers if they decide they'd like to purchase your home? They're usually perfectly fine with paying the buyer's agent's commission. They know that the buyer has their right to their own representation, and they also understand that after purchasing a home, buyers can be a bit extended. They have to come up with a down payment, they have to come up with their closing costs, and it would typically be pretty hard for them to come out of pocket to pay for their buyer's agent as well. And who has all the money at the end of a real estate deal? It's the seller. So even for sale by owners are typically very happy to pay that relatively small fee and allow the buyers the flexibility in purchasing their home. And again, that is if me or whoever your agent is reaches out to them first, because they will want to know that the agent is handling it on the buyer's behalf throughout the process. So as I said before, in a typical MLS listing, the commission is always noted in the MLS. It has not necessarily been required and it's always negotiable. However, the buyer's agent's commission is typically half of that original 5 to 6% that listing agents were getting and keeping all to themselves back in the 80s and prior. So almost always we'll see it listed as 2.5% or 3% in the MLS as well. We'll write that number on our buyer agency agreements, basically saying that that's what I will be paid by the seller of the home. So what may be changing, you might ask? Over the past year, there have been several very large court cases against the NAR, National Association of Realtors, and many different larger real estate brokerages that I will not get into right now, but basically they accuse NAR of having tactics to coerce sellers into paying higher commission rates and requiring it. They don't want sellers to have to pay for the buyer's real estate agent. So they don't want sellers to be required to pay the buyer's agent's commission, and they want to make sure that sellers understand that the rates are negotiable. So at this point, NAR signed an agreement, and the main thing is that agents will no longer be able to share commission structures in the MLS. They don't want the MLS, of which NAR and these huge brokerages do have some sway over, to require a commission, so they're just getting rid of it altogether. So agents will no longer be allowed to share what commission rate they are planning to offer in the MLS. Now, it didn't ban the use of other websites for this purpose, and real estate agents already do have a ton. And I do think that in the DC metropolitan area, people do understand, for the most part, that people have a right to fair pay, and people should have a right to fair representation, whether that's in a courtroom or a home purchase. It would be unfair to buyers to have to decide whether or not they can afford to have a buyer's agent and whether or not it's worth it to have one. So I think in the DC area, things will continue much the same as they always have. We'll just have the information available between agents through some other source. And things will continue much the same as they have for the last 30 or so years. So what is my advice? If this does get signed in July and we're moving forward and you're not sure, or you may have to pay for your own buyer's agent, it's twofold. Number one, make sure you interview a few buyer's agents. If you are coming out of pocket, if you do have to pay for them, you're going to want to make sure that you're working with one who is quality, who's going to do a great job, get you a great place, and hopefully be able to negotiate well enough so that the commission more than pays for itself. And number two, although I do think it'll remain pretty consistent to the way we have been doing it overall, in July and August, in the first couple of months, there may be some sellers who are trying to test the waters, see what they can get away with as far as offering lower commissions or no commissions to buyer's agents, which would mean that the buyer has to come up with a difference or whatever you have worked out with your realtor on the buyer agency agreement. So I'd say if you are ready now, get out there now. There are still a couple months till July. If you're under contract on a home, by the time these changes take effect in July, none of them will affect you in the slightest. So get out there now. Call a realtor, pick a great one, see some homes, make an offer, and purchase your place. We already know the Fed doesn't plan to lower the rates until the end of the year, and when they do, it won't be by that much. So there's really no difference. If there's nothing else holding you back, then it's a great time to go out there and do it. I have a really great home buyer's guide. I put a link below in the description for you to be able to get a hold of that. It's a really great resource, very simple and clean, easy to use. Great if you're a first-time home buyer or as a review. So make sure you check that out. While you're down there, I hope you get a chance to leave some feedback or questions in the comments. I'd love to have a discussion on this one. After watching this video, I think you would really love watching this video next. Thank you so much for watching. Everything that we do on this channel is meant to make your move to or within the DC area easier on you. So make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss something that could help.